Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for all those who are introducing themselves in the chat. Good to see a lot of familiar names up there. Really appreciate it. As Kara mentioned, my name is Rob Coyle. I am the Digital Credentials Program Manager here at OneEd Tech. And we are thrilled to be able to have this panel today to talk about microcredentials and specifically our TrustEd Microcredential Coalition framework, which you'll learn a lot more about today. I'll give a moment for each of our panelists to introduce themselves. And besides just who you are and where you're from, why you're here, tell us a little bit about why this work is important to you and why you feel that this is a positive movement to help learners. So how about I hand it first over to my colleague Kelly, and then we can go with Dr. Davis and then Ryan.
Wonderful. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm Kelly Hoynell. I'm the Director for Higher Education Programs here at OneEd Tech. So my role is really to help some of our higher education members through this work and supporting their credentialing as they're trying to impact their learners and what they are trying to show and achieve in their lifetimes. I think this is so important to me because I think back to where I started my career in high school, career in technical education, and really be able to connect education to work and making those skills very transparent to learners, because so many times our learners are unable to really understand what they do know and can prove and what jobs they're qualified for. So I think this is really exciting work for us. Chris?
Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Davis, Vice President of Academic Services Quality at the University of Maryland Global Campus, formerly known as the University of Maryland University Campus, for those who've been in the business for a long time. My portfolio at the university is very broad. I have all the good stuff that everybody is very jealous of. I've got registrar, I've got transfer credit, course scheduling, assessment, accreditation, so all the good things. But one of the things that is very exciting, of all that good stuff that my team has been working on for a few years now, is our digital credential strategy. And it's become even more important in the university in our strategic plan, where we're looking at one of our pillars is around skills and documenting skills and how we can use comprehensive learner record, how we can use badging to demonstrate what students are learning above and beyond what's on the traditional transcript. I also am on the OneEd Tech board, so I'm doubly committed to this activity and in the work that's going on. And Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. My name is Ryan Lufkin. I'm the Vice President of Global Academic Strategy here at Instructure, the makers of Canvas. And I think for us, if you're not familiar with the expansion of Instructure's ecosystem over the last 10 years, Canvas is the core of our learning ecosystem, but we've acquired a number of companies. So Parchment most recently, but prior to that, Concentric Sky, the makers of Badgers, and Portfolium before that. So building the pathways, the credentials, and now the verified credentials network aspect of that. And so pulling these pieces together to really, build towards that comprehensive learner record, that future of student-centered credentials. And personally, I've spent a lot of time actually going out and doing additional micro learning across my career, and so doing certificate programs from eCornell and other programs. So I've seen the benefits of the non-degree programs, and post-COVID now, as we've seen just an explosion of those micro credential programs, I think it's more important than ever to do the work that OneEd Tech's working around building that trust between employers and academic teams.
Thank you so much. My own journey as I was, going through education and working my way through an undergraduate degree in history. I was trying to figure out what can I do with myself when I grow up, and I discovered this pamphlet that was like, so what can you do with a degree in history? And it helped to make connections between this, the academics that we did in the classroom and the actual skills that could be used in various employment fields. And this was back before skills was a hot topic that we talked about in higher ed all the time, but it certainly has shaped my thinking a lot of it in a lot of ways, taking what we traditionally would learn in academic settings and even non-academic settings, and then how that can relate. You can, transfer that skills, that knowledge to new areas, and it opened up a thinking for a lot of different ways for me. And so it aligns so much with this work about helping our learners be able to see new possibilities and explore new opportunities that maybe they hadn't previously considered. As we get into some of the conversation, we do want to just start with some quick level setting for at least how we are going to be using some of these terms today. Micro-credential being a big one. I always joke, we don't know how to spell micro-credentials yet, let alone what it is, right? Is it one word, two words? There's a hyphen? I don't know. But for the purposes of today, we are at least going to talk about micro-credentials as some sort of smaller than a degree or a certificate type of learning. It could be a skill, it could be a competency, it could be a course. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can slice up what a micro-credential is. But for the purposes of our conversation today, we're looking at an achievement that is, smaller than sort of a large formalized degree or a formal, certificate program. Open badges, if for those who aren't familiar, it is a form of a digital badge specifically built towards the Open Badges standard that's been around since about 2012. The idea is that by using, predetermined ways to express the achievements that our learners have accomplished, then it makes it a lot easier to port that credential from one place to the next, make it so it's very easy to be understood. The data contained within it can be understood by both a person and a machine. That's probably about as deep technical as we're going to get today, so don't panic, but just want to kind of make sure everyone's understanding. And specifically, the work of the Credential Coalition is based on the Open Badges, specifically version 3.0 standard for those who are familiar with that. And then there's also these broader terms that we talk about a lot in the digital credential space of LERs and wallets. These are, again, for the purposes of today, generic terms that are used to kind of represent a collection of credentials in some place. Obviously, there's a lot more to unpack in all of those terms, but for the purposes of today, those are kind of the high level definitions that we're going to stick with. And so next, I'd like to hand the time over to Chris, and hopefully you can kind of help us understand what problem are we solving here. What is this work all about?
Thanks, Rob. So the challenge, when I took a survey in May of last year, which was around which are some of the bigger problems with micro-credentials. And you can see the results here. First is inconsistent rigor. Second is quality completeness. Third is not industry relevancy. And I think all these, I think part of the challenge here from my perspective is that it's not that there is a single right way to do it. There are lots of valid ways that an educational institution and non-educational institutions can approach credentials. But it's much like the visually impaired people encountering an elephant in the wild and grasping different parts of it and thinking this is the entirety of it. There are values from all parts of that. But what in the next survey is not from One Tech, but it talks about challenges or drawbacks to your organization associated with a resume that includes non-degree or alternative credentials, and unsure of the quality of the education that goes with that inconsistent rigor in the quality part of it. Unsure of the skills and competencies that are required. That's one of the things we're working on at UMGC is how do we define skills? And as my colleagues like to talk about, it's not skills just in the way that we as academics think of skills, but what's the language that employers, when they say a particular set of words that are a skill, how do those two things come together, and that we have that consistency? And that's not simple. And that's where the uncertainty comes in when we say on a transcript, on a resume, on a digital credential, what is that documenting? And related to that then is what's the alignment with those occupational professional standards? And the reality is that a lot of occupations and professions don't have standards. When I started my career in higher ed, I was a dean over IT programs, And even there, a lot of our programs certainly had professional standards that Cisco and Microsoft were coming up with, but not every program had those. And certainly as we go beyond other kinds of programs, so Rob talked about history. Well, what are the professional standards for somebody that's getting a degree in history? What does that mean? There isn't really infrastructure to tap into around that. And that then leads into this next part of uncertainty. What does the credential represent? And so we've moved on. Okay, we're going to come back. All this then becomes, okay, somebody has a credential, a badge, comprehensive learner record, something in their digital wallet. What does it mean? And so if we can go to the next slide now. And so the issue is of variability. There's a wide range in how badges are being used. Kelly likes to talk about a situation where she earned a badge. She's very excited that she earned this badge, except that it doesn't really indicate anything because she just went to a presentation. It doesn't really denote anything other than the participation badge that I was there, I showed up, doesn't document that she actually learned anything, doesn't document that she could actually do anything as a result of that. And so there's that varying level of rigor. And what it comes down to, as I've thought about this and in the work that we've done as the coalition, is how do we use the metadata to describe what different credentials are within of themselves, so that we can shift from that uncertainty of value to being able to say that this is what this means. We're signifying that the learner that they participate in something, that they know something and they know how to do that. And the context then also matters. So who's issuing that? What's the purpose of why that's being issued? Certainly in higher ed, one of the things we get, a lot of times people want to issue badges because we want people to be motivated. We want students to be engaged, to be retained. That serves a purpose, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything to people outside of the university. And what's the intended value for the learner, all connected into that. So I think on the next slide, we've got some examples from UMGC. Now, mostly UMGC, we've been working on a comprehensive learner record, and we've issued, I think, around 1,700 or more for our MBA program in terms of the comprehensive learner record. But the variety of certificates we've done, and we don't do a lot with badges, but it kind of illustrates the variety of what we have. I'm going to start with the Digital Forensics Examiner Digital Media Collector badge. This comes out of our School of Cybersecurity and IT, but it's based on competencies and certified by the National Security Agency. So it's a third-party recognition where they've looked at our curriculum and said, yes, your curriculum meets this, so we can issue this to students who have taken a certain set of courses that are tied to that. So that's got third-party validation. It's not just that they did the courses, but the courses have assignments in them that are aligned to what does this there. Skipping to the upper next corner, the Greater Washington Partnership is a partnership of employers in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Richmond corridor, that Greater Washington area. A few years ago, they said, well, let's create some digital credentials standards. And we latched onto their digital generalist badge. And we said, okay, here's the credentials. These are our courses where we teach those things. So any student who completes that gets this GWP badge. The problem with that is that now the GWP has decided that they're not going to sponsor that badge anymore, which kind of leaves us a little bit of a lurch about what we do. But that one was more about the knowledge. What are students learning? They accomplish those within the course. In the lower right corner, our Cyber Warriors team is our competitive cybersecurity team. And on one hand, you can look at this saying, well, it's a participation badge. It's that people were part of that, but it's a competitive team that has had some success in competitions and applying things, but doesn't necessarily tie to curricular outcomes the way that the other two do. And then the Honor Society is another recognition that we give, where again, it's participation, but it's participation in something where you met the requirements to be part of that. And our bridge program is with our Asia programs. We have a program to prepare people for U.S. higher education. It has some non-college classes in English as a second language, has some basic college courses within it. So it's kind of a hybrid mix of these kinds of things. So they kind of illustrate just within one institution, the variety of different kinds of badges that can be offered in credentials, and how do you make sense then of what do each of those things mean in the larger context? And that's where I'm really excited about the work that we've been doing in the consortium for the next stage in the evolution of our digital credentials to come back and say, okay, now using this framework that we're going to talk about, how do we align what we're doing and make this make more sense to the students, to the learners, as well as to third parties about that are consuming this information about what these things make, what it means.
Mhm. Great, thank you, Chris. One of the things that I think it's important for us to just pause on for a second, and as we talk about this work and why we are coming together, I think that there's a lot of understandable use cases of the benefits of credentials for learners, for students. But one of the things that we often don't talk about collectively is, well, how do we actually make use of those? What makes those credentials be able to be meaningful? Yes, all of the work that went into it, but then what do I do with it? How can I use this? And one ed tech and arguably the broader community recognizes that we need to make sure that the artifacts that we are producing for our learners, the tokens, certificates, even the degrees are transferable to someone else. Someone else can read them, can understand what they are. Incompatibility of a lot of this information is a showstopper, right? If no one can share that data with anyone else, then it doesn't have as much value as it possibly could. With digital work, anything electronically, right? Being able to make sure that it can be understood by multiple parties, that it can be shared, that across platforms. I often joke about the old days when you couldn't even get Mac and Windows computers to share, right? Or be able to get a Word document read on both without reformatting a disk and all of that craziness. So we have these standards that were created by the community for the purpose of being able to benefit the whole community and all of our learners, and not just have a solution that is siloed within any one particular type of platform or software or any one solution. Creating a way that will ensure that these credentials can be shared and that the data can be unlocked within them is a really important aspect of how this is going to be successful for all of our learners. Can you go ahead and go to the next slide there, please, Kara? Thanks. So digital micro-credentials, right, it's beyond just the electronic sticker. It's beyond, the paper certificate that we can put in mail. It's a way to be able to provide a lot of rich data to help these credentials be able to be shared and allow the learner to have all the most benefit. And there's a lot of opportunity there. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to dive too deep in that, but just wanted to recognize that there is a lot of power that using these electronic credentials and using this data can provide. And we're going to talk more about that as we go through. Go ahead and go to the next slide there, please. So thanks. So particularly, like as I mentioned earlier, right, a lot of the open badge standards or open badge conversations are built on this one particular standard. There's been a few versions over the years, but at its core, an open badge is a way to package in rich data about the learner, about what they did to achieve this credential, and a lot of other useful information to provide context around what went into earning this achievement. And there's a few different types of digital credentials in addition to the open badges, right? Comprehensive Learner Record is another one that is supported by the One Ed Tech community. And many of the people on this call today were contributing to that, have contributed to that effort over the years, and we're very grateful for that. I think it's just important for us to understand that we are trying to provide our learners with a way to maximize the benefits of all of this. And as we talk further around the framework that this coalition developed, it's important to understand that we are built on open standards that we as a collective community have designed in order to help our learners. It's not a siloed solution. As a matter of fact, it's to, the whole work is around breaking down those silos and making sure that the full power of the credential is beneficial, that the learner can share them and can get credit, and that people can understand what they really did. And with that, I'm actually going to kind of pivot now over to Ryan, and ask you to talk about what the coalition is and how do we get here?
Yeah, one of the things that I think was interesting is at the One EdTech Summit, Credential Summit in 2023, I think we all left with a sense that there was it was a little bit of chaos. It was the Wild West, I heard more than once. And so it was really interesting, fast forward just a year of having these conversations and forming this group. It felt like this year's Credential Summit, there was much more order to the chaos, or at least, a path towards order. And so I think, last year, one of the things that we had talked about when forming the coalition was the idea that we needed to bring trust, build trust through alignment, and do that by bringing together enough powerful organizations to agree on the same things. And so we looked at the different stakeholders within the process, right? And as you look at the different use cases, we need to make sure that earners are able to share their achievements when and how they choose, right? That's the ability to showcase and curate is really important. We've used those terms quite a lot. We need to make sure that the receivers of the credentials have enough data to actually have trust that those earners have actually can demonstrate the skill that they developed. And then we need to make sure that the issuers are aligned so that they can actually build that data into the open badges themselves, right? That metadata itself. And so, knowing all of that, knowing that we need to make sure all the stakeholders are represented, we pulled together a group of organizations, and I say we. I'm one of the beneficiaries of it, and it really was the work of Kelly and Rob and your team. But we pulled together a great group that actually represents these different stakeholder groups. And Kara, if you go to the next slide, and this is just kind of the beginning of it. You'll see issuing organizations, employers, ed tech vendors like myself and Instructure representing this. And so really coming together to answer these problems and making sure that we don't have the blind spots, I think we've seen in some other efforts, is incredibly important as we put this group together. And it's a growing coalition. That's the point too, is we want to make sure that we continue to represent all of the stakeholders and building out what this looks like. And essentially, that openness is key to this. The student-centered nature of it is key. And so we took the first pass at creating a TrustEd Microcredential framework. And I will preface this because it's interesting. As we've talked to different groups about this, there are different ways to slice this, right? And I've heard a lot about, oh, we've done it this way, we did it this way. The goal really was to do it in a way that was simple enough to get widespread adoption, but gave enough direction that we could really build on this. And so we promise not to get too wrapped around the axle on our definitions of these. I think you'll see that there's some order to this, and there's a link here, and I don't know, Kara or Kelly, if you want to share that in the chat, but there is the broader framework. But at a high level, this is how we chose to break this down. You've got recognition badges. I think early on we called them for fun badges or something like that. Really, those badges that you can see don't have a lot of assessment. They can be just proof of membership of an organization, but they acknowledge some level of participation. They're not overly rigorous. The next step in complexity would be the knowledge, proof of knowledge microcredential, right? In that case, the user has actually demonstrated the foundational knowledge. They've successfully completed an exam, right, to prove that knowledge, and they've aligned that to the earning criteria, right? The rubric behind achievement of that knowledge, but they haven't necessarily demonstrated application of that knowledge, right? It's just the fact that they have learned it. And the next phase really is the application of that knowledge. I have learned it and now I've applied it. And in some cases that will have, proof of application and things like that that could be piggybacked onto that. but the idea that they've actually applied that learned knowledge. Again, like a research project, any sort of paper or definition of how that knowledge has been applied, things like that. We hear more and more about what about experiential learning and apprenticeships, things like that. How would we tie those in? And again, obviously, this application badge is or application credentials where you would actually roll that up. So it's our first pass at really defining value, from left to right, increasing level of value, and in doing so, building that trust with employers, with academic institutions where a student may want to go and transfer their credentials. I see that with my 19-year-old right now. She spent a lot of time in Spanish immersion all the way through high school, and was told that she would step directly into a minor when she went to the university. She went to the university and they said, no, you don't get a minor for that. And so she's left saying, well, what did I spend all that time and that effort for, right? Because of that misalignment in the actual underlying data, the underlying promise, it wasn't transferable. And I think whether that's between academic institutions, whether that's between academic institutions and employers, but in that case, academic institutions at different levels of high school and college, creating that trust for learners and employers and academic institutions really is key.
One of the really great examples in talking to some of our other members that they've shared, and this is more from an employment perspective, is that the knowledge micro-credential, that could be, learning the skill, that could be, learning whatever it is, but the application is, how does that skill, how does that knowledge apply to my particular workplace? So, right, you can learn all about how to use Excel, but then how are you actually using it at your particular employer might be where the application comes into. And I just thought that was a really great kind of way to look at it. As we look at it, it's a journey, right?
Yeah.
And all the spectrum there.
And I want to jump back in and just respond to Nate's comment in the chat. And I apologize if it felt like I was being derogatory towards those badges that don't necessarily align to the deeper knowledge. We weren't. And the reason that there's a definition for those badges is we very much acknowledge that many of them carry a lot of value for, so-called soft skills, for co-curricular activities. They absolutely have a value that can lend itself to either academic advancement or aligning to potential job skills. That's why the definition is there. So I apologize if my wording, my for fun badge usage jumped in there, but I do want to make very clear that we value those, and that's why they have a place within this framework.
Yeah, so, and I'll jump in and kind of give a little bit more context of how we came up with some of these categories and what we were looking for. And I would reiterate that we know that many institutions or organizations have created their own frameworks and things like that. So we hope that you can see your framework within this. This is really about identifying the expected data that should be included if you're trying to represent this type of learning. So you may have 6 different levels at your organization or whatever it may be. This is really about just having some clarity for the larger ecosystem about what we should be putting out and expecting in data forms in these credentials so that they have good transparency, which leads to that value and trust. So as we were looking through and trying to identify what areas we were going to include in this data, we talked about relevancy and trust. What does this micro-credential actually represent? Is it clearly representing a skill? I'm going to pick on some of the softer or durable skills, as we sometimes call them, like leadership has a wide ranging definition about what it can be. And leadership for a high school student is going to look very different than an MBA student. So making sure that you have some context and alignment to what that skill actually is, linking it to a framework. So in Chris's earlier example about the NSA badge, the national security alignment to their cybersecurity stuff, that gives it more credibility, because then it's not just like, Joe's training has decided that this is what cybersecurity is. This is actually an NSA level kind of decision. So being able to link to frameworks, whether they're industry frameworks like the NSA or the NIST or some of those in the cybersecurity world, or accreditation frameworks, or the national, the NACE, the career competencies, or the AAC&U value rubrics, and having some context to those skills really helps to agree with that framework alignment. And also, who is issuing the badge? and what is their expertise? So that gets to the credibility. So why do we trust that this person is qualified to say that a learner has achieved this skill? So being able to include data that speaks to those concerns is what we really looked at. And we do that through some of the issuer accreditation, the frameworks and skills fields within the Open Badge. The other area we looked at on the next slide was about how do we prove that the learner has actually achieved what we said they achieved by issuing them this micro-credential. So things about what was the criteria? How did you earn it? Did you have to, was it a pass fail? Was it 80%? Did you have to get 2 of the 5 competencies? All of those things go into understanding what that achievement actually represents. Was there a rubric? Can you include that rubric? Can we show that there was proof of achievement through evidence and things like that? How rigorous was it? So I'll go back to my leadership example. You can go to a 1-hour leadership workshop, or you can have a 9-month experience where you had coaching and mentoring and application, different opportunities for what that rigor could look like. And then what type of achievement is being recognized? Is it part of a class? Is it a co-curricular? Is it a certificate? Is it graduate level? Is it undergrad? Is it community organization? Is it, there's lots of different ways for this achievement to be earned. So let's give the information that a receiver, a potential employer or a higher education institution or someone else that might be looking at it about, does this person actually know what they say they know? And we do that through some of the fields like evidence, rubric, result of that assessment, criteria, duration, achievement type, all of those things. And I would clarify that we talked a little bit about open badges beforehand. This is all built on that open badge standard. It is an open standard that many people use already. These fields already exist. Some of them are optional fields. So some of the suppliers might not have them, the software companies might not have them available to you, but they are easy to be added so that you can do this kind of information. So when we looked at all of those kinds of questions and we built out this framework and we came down to these types of credentials that we were looking for, this is what that framework kind of ended up looking at. And we just pulled out the knowledge and application ones because that's where we were focusing on defining the expected data elements. So as I talked about previously, the skills, the framework alignment, the issuer, all talks about, should this organization that's be issuing it, like you don't want me issuing a badge about brain surgery because I am not an expert in brain surgery. So if I issued somebody a credential in brain surgery, you should not trust it. But if a medical school issued a credential related to brain surgery, that is a very different experience. So that's kind of that first part of, who's issuing it, do they have authority, all of that information. The bottom of this title or this table looks at that evidence, like how can you prove that the learner has done it? Put the work product out there. Was it a video they made? Was it a research paper? Can you include it there? We did not require it because we know that occasionally there are times related to IP or learner, to give the learner some agency about choosing what evidence is shared or not. There might be work product that they don't want to share with a future employer. The rubric is very important though if it is created, so you know how that learner was scored. And then next we dived into the rest of the fields that we looked at related to results, criteria, assessment, duration. We included the endorsement field as well. So if a third party has supported or approved the credential, to be able to leverage that endorsement field to make that even more valuable. So that was kind of the high level of what this framework actually ended up looking like when we looked at trusted micro-credentials for the knowledge level and application level. We know there are more when you look at a Bloom's taxonomy, when we look at any other framework, there's lots of other levels, but we focused on these two because any additional level above these is probably going to have similar data requirements. So we really focused on these. The website that was in the chat, and we can put it in again, allows you to dive in deeper to this. So from here, we'll talk about kind of what's next.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think it's important to note is that this is an emerging framework. We've got the framework established, it's out there in its current draft form, and we're so excited about the opportunities that this work is enabling. But it's not done. We are by no means finished. We have a lot of conversations yet to have around how does this framework actually get operationalized within platforms? What does it look like for learning providers to get this data in there? You'll notice if you look at the link where some of these fields we have whether it's required or optional, but we also have additional guidance for, well, what would it look like? What does that actual data contain? Is it a link to something else? Could you actually put just text in the credential to help share those things? So there's continuing conversations. The coalition very much is still active, and we've got a lot of opportunities to continue to explore. One of the big ones, thank you, Kara. One of the big ones that we have been talking about from the very beginning is, what does a certification program look like? Is there a way that we can certify platforms, badging platforms, to ensure that they are enabling the issuing of a trusted microcredential? Are those required fields required? Are those optional fields exposed so that an institution or someone providing the learning can actually put data in there? What does it look like to ensure that a leadership badge from UMGC, just picking on you since you're on the call, Chris, how can we ensure that the institution is including the data? It's one thing to know the platform can do it. It's another thing to make sure that that the data is being included in the way that the framework requires. So there's more work to be done, and more opportunities to explore. And we're grateful for that because it allows us to continue to add voices into the conversation. We are looking for this framework to really provide a great opportunity for learners, and that's going to take many voices, and that's going to take some time to continue to refine and make sure that that it's really meeting the needs that we are hoping it can. So you certainly can stay tuned for more information as this continues to roll out and evolve. One of the things we wanted to make sure we left everyone with, though, was some potential items that you could do if you are interested in continuing to support this work. One, there is a commitment that is an open letter, basically, to the industry, saying that we who have signed this believe that that this work is important and valuable, and that we want to see it adopted widely. And so we've created this, some might call it a pledge, where it's an endorsement of the work or commitment to endorse the work. And so the link there is that, and anyone is welcome to add their signature to that. You certainly can start talking to your providers or your education institutions about the framework and about those types of data, and see if you currently collect that data. If not, what would it take to get that data, and then how can you start to include that in your credentials. And as I mentioned, be on the lookout for more information. Additional webinars are coming, not only to specifically support the ongoing evolution of this work, but we also plan on some, I will call them education type webinars, to help people understand, what is evidence? What does that look like? How can you use that in the standards? And some of those other metadata fields that where there's a lot of opportunity, but may not be as widely used as it could be right now. So we want to help support the work by helping people understand all of those benefits there. And if you are a One Ed Tech contributing member, you are welcome to join the coalition. If you'd like, you can talk to Kelly and I, send us an email, and we can get you more details about that.
So Rob, I'm going to jump in because there was a question that I think you and I can address about, we've talked
Great.
about interoperability within kind of education, but what about on the employer side? Have we been doing any work there? And I did link to the Wellspring Initiative. That's been some grant funded work we've done over the years, but really looking at how does this translate on the employer side from that? Do you want to?
I would say that there's a lot of opportunity there, and we are always looking for partners to help us continue that work. Certainly, we would love to see the technology progress further. There's been some preliminary work done. There's a lot of conversations happening around what that looks like. Some of the feedback that from the employers as to why they haven't done this yet is what led into the creation of this coalition, right? They're saying, okay, we'll do this, but we don't understand, the value necessarily, because we don't understand what these credentials are, what they mean, what the rigor is. So, help us understand that, and then we'll be more likely to invest in that aspect of consuming the credentials and unpacking the data. So there's a little chicken and egg going on there, but we are continuing to beat that drum, and we're continuing to make small step progress. And if anyone would love to partner with us around progressing that work forward too, we would welcome that opportunity for sure.
Yeah, and we have done some work. There is a resume standard to align the open badges work along with that. So we're making some some steps forward in that, working with HR Open. I sometimes like to say though, we always struggle with some of our systems within the education system being ready to be interoperable. Employers have the same struggles when it comes to their HR and talent systems. It's not as simple always as we think. So it's continuing to work through that. In the chat, there was a question about, are we interested in engaging with community-based organizations that provide on-ramp training, or just focusing more on higher education partners? And there was a +1. And I would say that, when you looked at the group of coalition members, we tried to look at it from all angles. So we did not have a ton of community partners, but some of us have partnerships with those. We were hoping to create this framework so it would work for any type of issuer. So whether that is a employer who is issuing credentials, whether that's an education institution, whether it's a community organization or other kind of non-traditional education provider, we were really focused on trying to make the language in a way and make it understandable for all types of learning.
And I do think Simone's comments as well about this being international, we do hope this will be a global approach, and so those perspectives on EU and APAC and Latin America, like regulations and frameworks as well, definitely something we want to bring to the table. So great comment.
Yeah, I think that's like we talked about earlier, right? We've started here. There's still, more opportunities to continue to expand the work, and we will get there for sure. Definitely the work in the European Union, the Australian Microcredentials framework is fantastic work, and they very much have a place here. And it's just a matter of, as we march along, we will hopefully be able to uncover and address all of those opportunities.
Yeah, we have another question that I think goes to some of the other chat about how do we ensure that participation badges don't dilute the reputation and quality of knowledge and application badges to employers. So that's really what started some of this conversation, because a year ago it was the Wild West. Employers like, I don't understand what these badges mean. Like Chris had mentioned earlier, that I get these badges for going to conferences or presenting or there is no learning outcome that has been assessed and applied. There are very valid participation badges that do have value too. So we really try to define what the expectations are for the data so that they don't get diluted, so that the quality ones don't get lost in the shuffle of everything else. So really to be able to pull that data into it to make it say, here's why these matter to people. I think about, as a learner, I think about my middle school daughter. If she gets enough of the badges like, hey, you came to school on every Friday this month, that doesn't mean as much. I mean, there's very valid reasons about engagement and recruitment and retention, but when it comes to getting a potential job, doesn't mean as much to her, and she'll start to lose the understanding of that these are different. So that's where some of this work came in, and I don't know if any of the other panelists want to kind of.
Yeah, I would say, right. I mean, all of these badges, all types of badges have their place, right? Whether it's a motivation, right? It could be a great motivator for an individual to earn any type of achievement, whether it's the perfect attendance record that actually may have a lot of value to a hiring employer to show that this person, shows up all the time. But it also could be a legitimate degree that's offered as a digital credential, but there's no data behind it. And so all you're looking at there is a digital sticker that you hope has brand recognition. Unless you can include the data for all of those types of achievements, then it's very subjective as to what how someone will interpret it. And that's what we're all trying to achieve, right? Include the data that we think is going to help people understand the context for which the achievement was earned. It's not a judgment on what the achievement is, because that's not our swim lane, right? Ours is to help make sure that the data is transparent so people can understand what that achievement is and the full context behind what was earned. There's Ryan, this one's for you. There's a question about Canvas credentials adopting a framework.
I can't speak to that directly. So I think, as most people know, we announced at the end of last year that we acquired Parchment, and over due diligence, we were basically allowed to just close that at the beginning of this year. So we're only about 2 months into really defining our framework for what the future looks like. Yeah, obviously, the comprehensive learner record, the vision for that, will involve the adoption of some frameworks and some evolution of that. And really, how do we ensure that we continue to offer pathways of credentials in a way that our customers want, while also moving towards the comprehensive learner record? So watch for more of that in the near future. We'll also at InstructureCon, no doubt, be making some announcements in July, but you'll see some of that roadmap being made more public in the near future.
To be fair to all of our provider friends, the framework is new. And so no one has had a lot of time to be able to quickly pivot and implement anything in its full capacity. Roadmaps for development, they take time to get on and to change, and there's always competing priorities. So that's where that commitment letter comes in, right? That is the organization's opportunity to say, we see this as important, we're going to do this, but by design, there's not a specific time frame on there. We're not expecting UMGC to start issuing framework badges and coalition or trusted microcredentials by the end of the year or by the end of the week, or any of the providers to be able to pivot immediately. Obviously, this is important work, and getting things right sometimes takes time.
And for the value of the recording, there was a couple of questions that we had answered via writing, but we might bring those up just so for those people who are on the recording. One of them was, as we were talking about LERs and their impact on learning and hiring, they like to use the analogy that LERs will do for learning and hiring what the electronic health records have done for medical care. So what do you guys think about that analogy, perspective, or thoughts on that? Or maybe we don't like it.
Ryan or Chris, you want to share some thoughts?
Maybe not. Oh,
Okay.
Well, it's a tough one. Before I was in higher ed, I did a little bit of a stint a long time ago now, in healthcare, looking at some of these issues. And so, yeah, Elizabeth, thank you for the bailout on that. At the time, and I'm afraid things haven't changed that much in the last 25 years, healthcare lagged behind so many other industries, even higher ed, in the use of technology and data interoperability. And so I think that's where it philosophically, conceptually, yeah, it's a similar idea. At the root of it is the idea that with a health record, again, in this ideal state, that you have something that you don't have to go to the hospital or the servicer to get a copy of a record. You have everything, you have control over that. So when you go to another place, you can say, here's my records, and I'm choosing what I give to you of that information. It's all consolidated in one place. The vision of a learning employment record is that same kind of concept, to be able to say, here's all the learning I've done, whether that was in formal education, through community organizations, other activities, and here's what my employment information is, in a way that's structured as data, so it's very interoperable. But we're so far away from that, achieving that ideal state, that in terms of practice, if you're focused on, okay, how does this work and look today, we're a long ways away from the ideal.
Yeah. And to me, I think the education has done a great job with open standards across the board. I think when you look at LTI, when you look at some of the other open badging standards, things like that, we've done a great job with that. I would say too, if the vision of your credentials partner is not a student-centered world, right? If it's not student portable, student curatable, student showcaseable, they're probably got the wrong vision. And that's where I think I have some concerns with some of the state wallets and things like that that are being produced that may not be as focused on a student being able to carry those credentials and those assets wherever they go. And we need to make sure that's something that we continue to promote.
Well answered. I think in theory, yes, but we know in practicality it hasn't been there. This one should be a little bit easier, but so for higher ed, these commitments and frameworks are they primarily for institutional level adoption, or can they be departmental as well? I don't know, Chris, if you want to answer since you're out of higher ed.
I think it's a yes and kind of a question. In Maryland, we've started a user group of people looking at digital credentials and kind of sharing experiences. And what we hear is the experiences are very different, as you'd expect of very different institutions. And we're a small state. We're not anywhere near as complicated, as large as some of the other states. UMGC, we're very centralized because it's the nature of who we are in our governance structures. So for us, a lot of it is everybody. For some of the more traditional schools or sister institutions, a lot of times there, it's not in academics at all. It's in student affairs and student life. That's where the interest around these digital credentials are. Within academic departments, sometimes some departments are early adopters, and others don't know what the conversation is about or why they should be interested. So I think that the framework provides that flexibility to say, whether you're a department or the university as a whole or somewhere in between, as you think about what's your strategy and approach, that it provides, it's a framework that it can help you think about how you approach this. It's certainly been that way for me and us at UMGC, and we were part of the consortium that worked on writing the framework. And after we finished that process and I look back on it, it's like, oh, this is actually really helpful. This advances our thinking about what we need to do and how to use digital credentials.
And I will say I love the power of technology. Agaston, who's actually the engineering manager for Canvas Credentials here in the structure, just slacked me, who's on the webinar, and said that they are in fact aligning to the TrustEd Microcredentials framework. And they actually, after they certify on Open Badges 3.0 later this year, they will be aligned to it as well. So essentially confirming that yes, we're working in, our engineering team's plugged in, they're actually listening to this webinar as well, keeping me honest, but making sure that I give the right answers. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's great.
There's a really great question too, and I think maybe all of us could chime in on this one, but the question about how are students actually engaging with this work? Are learners voicing that they actually want to use these credentials? And are they getting value with them? I think that's kind of sum up there. Kelly, have you had any interactions with learners or anyone talking to learners and their use of credentials?
Yeah, a little bit. So I would say we're in a unique place in One Ed Tech that we don't have direct interaction with students necessarily, but our members do. So we always encourage those conversations. I know a couple of years ago, this was more on the CLR side, but we had a great conversation with a student at one of our institutions who was able to take their comprehensive learner record to a job interview and actually advanced to the point where she was a finalist for something before she had even finished her degree because she was able to document all of those skills and credentials. Which was a very cool kind of anecdotal story, and we hear more of those at One Ed Tech. That is where this is very early days for our framework, but that was one of the conversations that we had, that those organizations that have direct connections to learners, like how can we engage them? The other area we've actually asked is like, can we all put on our employer hats as well? Because all of us are employers, to say, as an employer, where's the value, what would be missing, and things like that. I know Chris at UMGC has done some great research on their comprehensive learner record with learners and what their thoughts were on that. And I'm sure others have too. So. With that, though, I think we're almost at the top of the hour. So a couple of things to keep in mind is if you would like to continue the conversation, you please join us in Salt Lake City. We hear there will not be snow on the ground where we are, but maybe up in the mountains. June 3rd through the 6th, we will be there for our Learning Impact Conference. This is a great way to connect with the One Ed Tech community. We have a pretty strong set of sessions related to digital credentials, including one related to the TrustEd Microcredential Coalition with more of our members to dive deeper into that. And then also make sure to mark your calendar. The Digital Credentials Summit 2025 is March 3rd through the 5th in Phoenix, Arizona. We do not have the website launched yet, but we will later this summer, and the call for proposals will be open. But do mark this event on your calendar because it is a great event to really dive deep into this. That was the event Ryan had mentioned earlier, where we have moved from the Wild West to more structured chaos and some of that work. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.